Hi everyone, I'm Cyril Filias, the Learning and Development Specialist at CERIC. Welcome to today's webinar. Today is the second webinar of our new Career Theories and Model at Work webinar series that we started a couple of weeks ago with the webinar of Jim Bright based in Australia. And I want to say once again a big thanks to all of you for registering for this series and being so many with us, with close to 1,800 registration, which is amazing. So thank you all for being here today. And today, I'm delighted to be with Roberta Borgen Neault and Doji who will present their career engagement model and discuss strategies for applying the model with your client to achieve and sustain an optimal level of engagement. But before our two presenters get started, we would like to take a few moments to introduce you to CERIC, for those of you who don't know us yet, and share some housekeeping notes with you. So CERIC is a charitable organization that focuses on education and research in career counseling and career development in Canada. And we found projects that create new knowledge and develop innovative resources. We also have three main programs: the Canexis National Career Development Conference, which will be fully virtual these years and scheduled in January. We also have the careerwise.ca website, which features the top news and view in the field, with a French version called orientation.ca, and the Canadian Journal of Career Development, which is free to access. So you can learn more about all of the CERIC works and resources by visiting our website at ceric.ca. And also, because CERIC is always looking at new webinars or learning opportunity for you, we will greatly appreciate you sharing your feedback of the webinar, but also on your future learning needs in the survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of today's session. So thank you in advance for your answer. Now, just some housekeeping notes. If during today's webinar you have any questions or comments, please enter them in the question box you see on your screen, and we'll have a Q&A session where Roberta and Doji will address all your questions at the end of the webinar. Also, note that we'll send you the recording of today's webinar along with a presentation slide in the next few days. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter. Our first presenter is Dr. Roberta Borgen Neault. Roberta is the president of Life Strategy, adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia, and project director for the CCDF, the Canadian Career Development Foundation. Roberta is the co-developer of the career engagement model and has extensive experience as an educator and counselor supporting individuals and organizations with transition, engagement, and strategy to maximize their success. Our second presenter today is Dr. Doji. Doji is the Vice President of Life Strategies and Dean of Student Success at Yorkville University and Toronto Film School. Doji is an award-winning career professional with 25 years of experience, and she is the co-author of the Career Engagement Model. Her doctoral research focused on career engagement among Canadian career development practitioners. We are so thrilled to have these two experts live with us today to share their work and knowledge. So let's not wait any longer to get started, and let me pass it to Doji. Over to you, Doji.
Thank you so very much, and welcome everybody from wherever in the world you might happen to be. And you should be able to share my screen. I have to do full screen, and we should be good to go. So Roberta, over to you to talk about the book.
Thanks. Well, we are just so grateful for CERIC for having supported this book project. It's taken on and has a real life of its own, as evidenced by the number of people that have signed up for this webinar. It started many years ago, back in 2011. I was doing the last issue of the Journal of Employment Counseling, where I was editor, and brought together some theorists, thinking it would be really nice to have thoughts on theories in their own words, and it was, but we only gave them a few pages. So after that, we started talking at various conferences with Mary McMahon and Nancy Arthur, and pulled together, turns out, 43 chapters. Some of them were originally written in French and translated into English, and now the whole book is being translated into French and other languages. So this book is a unique look at theories and models from the perspectives of the theorists and the folks that develop the models or people who have used them extensively in creative ways. And each of the chapters brings the model to life with a vignette and then some practical tips and applications. So I'm using it in my own class. It's a really useful tool, and we just are so grateful to CERIC for keeping it alive with this free webinar series. And I'm sending my own students to the CERIC site to see some of the webinars from the other theorists as well. So we are so delighted to be here today to talk to you a little bit about our model, which is the career engagement model and is one of the chapters in the book. So we entitled our presentation today, Career Engagement, Realigning Challenge and Capacity in Chaotic Times. You'll learn later of the importance of both challenge and capacity in our model. And of course, we're living together globally the chaotic times right now in the pandemic. And so when we look at career engagement, we're going to cover a few sort of general ideas today. We're going to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 context because, of course, that's top of mind for many of us personally and also as we support our clients. We'll, of course, introduce the career engagement model, and then we want to leave you with some practical tips and strategies and resources that might help you bring that model to life in your own work. Deirdre and I always enjoy embedding some Mentormeter in our presentations, and so we thought we'd start by having you think about your own career engagement. So for Mentormeter, pull out your smartphone. So you just need your phone that has web access and go to a browser and put in www.menti.com. And then you'll be prompted for a code. And that code in this case is going to be 83 84 41 3. So again, Mentormeter.com and the code 83 84 41 3. And I want you to think about your own career engagement. We can already see that some folks have jumped in. And what one word describes how you are feeling. So we've got some contrasting words there already, some hopeful, some exhausted. What are some other words that describe how you're feeling about your own career right now? Uncertain, anxious, opportunistic, important, absolutely. Keep going. We got a lot of people on the call, so we should get some words here. Scattered. It's hard to read when they're jumping around like that. Yeah. Deirdre, jump in if you see some words. Yeah. Innovative, I saw.
I saw fatigue, so I think that's, you know, conflicted, happy. It's always interesting, Roberta, when we do something like this, we see such, in some cases, huge opposites in how people are feeling. But lots of similarities, but lots of opposites, lots of
you know how word clouds work, and so the words that aren't being mentioned quite as often are going to be too tiny for us to read with such a large group. But what we're seeing are words that are being used quite often growing. And so we're seeing words like uncertain and overwhelmed, but contrasted, as Deirdre mentioned, with words like hopeful. Exhausted is a big word there. Anxious is a big word. Challenged.
Excited is also getting bigger, Roberta.
Optimistic. I'm happy about that one. That was my doctoral research. So what I wanted to do was illustrate. This is fantastic. Keep it going. And what we'll do is make this available for you with the presentation at the end, and then you'll be able to expand it on your screen and actually see some of the smaller words. But the ones that are overriding right now are hopeful, overwhelmed, uncertain, challenged, excited. I think optimistic was still there.
It's still there. It's still there.
Optimistic is still there.
Okay. And it's funny, Roberta, that you say that we'll share this, but I don't know how to do that, so you'll have to coach me after.
I'll show you, which actually is really amazing because I'm not the tech person on our team. I'll take care of that.
Okay, I'll take us to the next slide. Thanks, everyone.
So when we think about the COVID context. When I've been working with clients and students, I've actually taken the time to begin, like, just as part of the relationship building and finding out what's going on for people and how they're living, because I've had, you know, students that are trying to do grad school sitting at the same kitchen table as a spouse that is having business meetings. And so the phone conversation is going on. They've both got their earphones on, but they're in the midst of distractions. I've had more calls and Skype Zoom meetings in the last while where there's been a child on someone's lap, or a dog that comes in, or a cat that is climbing across the screen. So people are working with a variety of comforts and a variety of distractions. We had one of our instructors who had the beautiful picture on behind her, you know, that you can do in Zoom, and it was interfering with our ability to, you know, with our bandwidth, and so we asked her to turn it off, and there she was, huddled in an unfinished basement in her business suit, looking all instructorish, but in a really, you know, different location. I've had people working from their closets, like on the floor of their closet, because that's the only sound baffling that they can get. And so the COVID context, obviously, you know, huge losses. People have lost family members, they've lost loved ones, and haven't even been able to be there with them at the end. So there's been absolute horrors that way. And then there's been disruption in almost any aspect of our life imaginable, which from a career engagement perspective has given us a really good opportunity to put our model to practice, because we believe in that holistic notion of career, as we'll share in a few minutes. So when we look globally, we're getting some pretty common messages around the world. Who would have thought that you know, different governments could come together and agree on the same things to be safe? Be kind has been a big buzzword, particularly in British Columbia. We're now wearing masks, where early on that wasn't such a common thing in some of the Western countries. And I was actually on a call with someone from Korea who said, well, we see anyone who doesn't wear masks in this situation as uncivilized. And that's before we were wearing masks in Canada, and very widely. And so it's very interesting how our thinking about you know, some of these things has changed so dramatically. So we're pulling together, trying to do things that will keep others safe, and trying to get on top of this pandemic. One of the really important things to remember, though, is that we are not all going through this in a similar way. So Deirdre, if you could shift slides, that'd be great. In the Canadian context, our unemployment rate has gone up in the spike, obviously, of the lockdown, and then it leveled off a little bit, but it certainly has not gone back to normal. We've had less confirmed cases. This is going back now only a few weeks, but we're already up closer to 200,000 at this point. So the numbers are changing very rapidly. And even within Canada, which is where Deirdre and I both are, huge differences in different parts of the country. So Quebec has been much more impacted, as has Ontario. BC sort of leveled off in the summer, and we were doing really well, and then had a bit of an uptick this fall. So Deirdre, if you can switch to the next slide, you'll yeah, here's the industries that have been hit the hardest. So obviously anything related to tourism, because traveling has slowed down so much. And again, in Canada and British Columbia, we had really built our economy on tourism, and had shifted. We were so proud of having shifted from a resource-based economy to tourism, as had many other parts of the world. And that's been shut down almost completely. Interestingly, some of the businesses that have done well have been like backyard gazebos, and, you know, putting pools in backyards, and just real changes as people have made their homes their sanctuaries in the short term. Motion picture, the whole industry has shifted, but You know, it's difficult to find a movie theater that you can go to. They open briefly with social distancing and then shut down again. But lots and lots of different industries, some that have very highly skilled professionals like dentists, and others that are very entry-level occupations. And we have seen also, thinking in the context of the Black Lives Matter, we've seen a disproportionate number of people of color impacted. And so that's really important for us to consider as well. So I've seen this quoted in a variety of ways. This one is from someone in Dubai, but that notion that we're all in the same storm and we're in really, really different boats. And that's important for us as career development practitioners to keep in mind, that even though we're all experiencing the pandemic, we all are impacted in various ways by the pandemic, we're not coming at it from the same position, and we're not navigating through it with the same resources. And so you can think about being in that big storm that's coming. If you're in a little life raft, or if you're in a big freighter, you're going to experience that storm differently. And that's what we've seen through the pandemic. We've seen a really uneven distribution of impact. So some people are working more than ever before, and some people haven't worked at all since the pandemic began. Some people are financially doing fine. They may be doing better than they were before. Other people are just barely getting by, or not at all. We discovered a situation at the university where students in residence who were international students, unable to go out and do the supplementary work that they had been doing, with loss of some income, you know, in one case hadn't eaten for 3 days. So, you know, that this is in a developed country, in, you know, a highly educated institution, and we just weren't even aware. So instructors have, you know, formed a food bank and started to support now up to 300 families just within the university setting. So we just really need to be sensitive and aware that people are experiencing this so differently, and we can't be flippant or you know, overlook the intensity of the impact on individuals' careers, lives, families, everything that they're experiencing related to the context we find ourselves in right now. So we want to turn back to Mentormeter. Get out your smartphones again. You're all very skilled at that. If you didn't get in the first time, then go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and use the code 8384413. And you can select any of these or all of these, but what are the biggest challenges you've experienced over the last several months? So wearing masks, using hand sanitizer, some people are allergic to it, avoiding your family and friends, working from home, homeschooling your children, and adjusting your recreational activities. So we're seeing the rise and fall of different ones of these as some people increase their entries, but avoiding family and friends seems to be impacting most of us the most.
And Roberta, I'll just jump in. I've had a little message that says, even though it says we select all that apply, apparently it's not letting us do that. So there's something that I didn't do quite right when I was setting up Menti this morning. So my apologies, everyone. This has now become a forced choice question.
Okay. So when you force the choice, you can see that the loss of family and friends is definitely taking the lead there. But others are important. So working from home has been a challenge for many people. Homeschooling children has been a challenge for quite a few people. Wearing masks is bothering some people, as is using hand sanitizer. And so, you know, those kinds of things we need to consider, that we may be saying, oh, wear a mask, and people are getting incredible, you know, rashes and irritations and headaches and all sorts of problems from that. And the same with using hand sanitizer. Deirdre, you were mentioning, you know, a friend that, you know, has her hands are so raw that she can't even wear her wedding rings anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, but the biggest challenge by far relates to the isolation, and you know, people are finding it extremely difficult to not be around their family and friends, and that carries into the workforce. I was reading an article the other day about work spouses and how much people are missing just being with the people that they spent the time with every day, and are finding some creative ways to get around that. I've missed working directly with Deirdre. It's really nice to be getting together by Zoom, but not the same as sitting around at a table together.
Well, and I think that it's, you know, we could do this again. We could have done this 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and the questions might have been different, or the answers. And again, we could do this, what could be 3 months from now. In part, I think that, like for me personally, the working from home was like, yay. I love working from home. But after, you know, what are we, 7 months of literally just, I'm in Zoom meetings constantly. I'm kind of getting tired of working from home. So you know, there's a bit of an evolution, if I can use that term, to what we're all going through, and there will be ebbs and flows. And I think that's, you know, again, what Roberta talked about earlier with that different, we're all in different boats, but experiencing the same storm. I would say we're experiencing the ferocity of the same storm differently as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Deirdre,
Okay.
you can introduce the model.
Okay, let's talk about the career engagement model. So we'll spend a few minutes on you know, talking about career engagement and what the model means, and maybe a little bit about how it started. Roberta always loves the story of how we started career engagement. But one thing from a contextual perspective, it's really important to understand the career in career engagement. For a long time, you know, when we thought about the word career, you know, when society thinks about the word career, it really thinks about our working life, or the job that we're in, whether we're a plumber or a career practitioner or an accountant or somebody that has worked lifelong in the tourism sector, whatever it might be. That's been the sum total of our career. But now, and this definition actually takes us back to 2012, and this is what I really embedded the definition in my doctoral work. Roberta and I agreed that you know, this could be just an engagement model, it could be a life engagement model, but we kind of like the word career. But we really want to make the, you know, the point that we're in the career engagement model. Career really is this interaction of work roles and other life roles over a person's lifespan. So this is how they balance paid and unpaid work, their involvement in learning and education. We could extend that to say their involvement in their life as a community member, perhaps doing volunteer work, their role in their families and how that evolves over time. So, you know, career becomes this very complex thing that when we're looking at the notion of career engagement, and, you know, at different times and with different clients, we're going to focus in on probably the role that is either producing the most challenge, or the experience that they're having that is, you know, kind of salient at that time. So we're going to focus in when we really look at career engagement. But overall, we really are talking about this holistic or whole person. So this probably won't be new for a lot of people, and we appreciate that. But for some of you, this might be a new model and a new image for you, especially seeing it in color. So career engagement really is this dynamic interaction of challenge and capacity. And so when the challenge is too great or too stimulating, we want to look at challenge not only as how difficult something is, but how stimulating or exciting something might be. When that's too high for the available capacity, people will move out of the zone of engagement towards that feelings of being overwhelmed. I just can't cope anymore. And ultimately, if it's not corrected, they can become actively disengaged. And this notion of overwhelmed, I want you to think about this from a stress and burnout perspective, that this is where stress and burnout live within the model. Is this notion that things have just gotten too challenging for the capacity that I have available. Then when we look at the other way is when capacity is kind of too high for the available challenge. That's when people move out of the zone of engagement towards being underutilized. And this is where boredom sets in. And interestingly, in my doctoral research, I surfaced a number of resources that indicated that although we focus a lot on the notion of being stressed and burned out and disability claims and all of those sorts of things that are obviously critically important, in actual fact, at least in some research, people that are bored are actually more problematic. Bless their little hearts, when they're bored at work, they tend to be looking at or engaging in what are called counterproductive work behaviors. So, you know, they're stealing time, perhaps not intentionally, but they're bored. They don't have anything else to do. So, you know, they might be a little more chatty. They might be disrupting, you know, other workers. They might be surfing the internet and checking social media and all of these sorts of things because they're just underutilized. They don't know what to do with themselves. And then again, if we're not able to kind of write them back into the zone of engagement, they become actively disengaged. Now, at some point, Roberta and I are actually going to find the right technology designer person, and this image is going to morph. So if you think about the two engage ends, and if you actually, I can do it with a piece of paper. Hopefully you can, you know, if you actually roll it like this, then the two disengaged zones kind of come together. And so the important thing within the model is that disengaged looks the same. So a disengaged person, and some studies show that this could be upwards 17 to 21% of the working population is actively disengaged, which means that in a lot of cases, they hate every moment of their job. So they are, you know, can be challenging to be around. They can be very, very unhappy. That can obviously spill over into life and family. So it's really, disengagement is not a very nice place to be, not for the individual that's disengaged, and in lots of cases, not for the people around them, whether they're work or family. But the challenge is how you would move somebody back into the zone of engagement could be drastically different depending on the route to disengagement. So if somebody became disengaged by being overwhelmed, so again, there was just too much challenge for the capacity that they had available, and they've been overwhelmed, an exciting new project is likely not going to help them. Instead, you might have to look at, how do I reduce the challenge? How do I make things easier? How do I perhaps downshift? Or how do I increase my capacity in order to meet the challenges? And so, you know, conversely, it would also work the other way. If the route to engagement was through being underutilized, what's going to move them back into the zone of engagement is going to be different. This is a standout in the model, at least when I was doing my doctoral research. This notion of two routes to disengagement and how somebody became disengaged was a really important contribution to the literature. The other thing that we really, Roberta and I have talked a lot about, kind of surfaced in a little bit in my doctoral work, even though the images on the screen are very work heavy, please really remember that career could be, you know, your role as a parent, as a community member, as a student, whatever it might be, that we've really come to understand that engagement or career engagement can have a concurrent experience. So somebody could be feeling quite overwhelmed and quite underutilized, kind of all in the same space. So a good example of that might be somebody that is feeling very underutilized at work right now. Perhaps they're not really working, or their hours have been reduced, so they don't really have enough to do. An example within my own work is we've really struggled with our admin assistants, our front desk folks, because the campus is closed, to find them enough work. And we want them to be working, we want them to be paying a salary, but we're trying to give them enough stuff to do. And yet, so they're kind of bored when it comes to their working role, but when it comes to their lives overall and dealing with the pandemic and all of the other things that we're experiencing, it can be quite overwhelming. So there can be lots of examples of how somebody can be both feeling quite overwhelmed and quite underutilized, kind of all in the same space. And oftentimes it's the role, you know, the different roles that we're juggling that will have those things. And it would be nice to say that they kind of cross each other out or cancel each other out and magically we're engaged, but it doesn't actually work that way. So the other thing I wanted to really make sure we talk about a little bit, I talked about this a little bit when it comes to challenge, that when we're thinking of the challenge component of the career engagement model, we're looking at the factors that have really emerged within the research that we've done have been motivating work and meaningful opportunities. So again, we don't want just to focus on how challenging, which would traditionally we would probably consider how tough something is, how difficult it is, the challenges that we're facing, but it's also about the notion of having motivating work opportunities, motivating life opportunities, meaningful opportunities, that really there's all of these things that kind of get up and get us going in the day. And then our capacity factors have evolved a little bit over time, but these are kind of where, you know, when we look at all of the research, I did my doctoral work in late 2012, early 2013, that this is kind of where we're now seeing incredible patterns, is this notion of, do you have access to the resources that you need to meet the challenges that you're facing? And resources could be a lot of different things. It could be your computer equipment. If all of a sudden my internet went down, that would be, you know, pretty disengaging. It would be pretty stressful and overwhelming. So it's all of the resources that we have access to. The resources can be not only time, but equipment, could perhaps be money, and it could be even the people in your lives. Then, of course, there's the relationships that we have. So our significant others, our work friends, our work family, Roberta called them. The overall notion of workload, and although we're using the term work here, again, within career engagement, we're looking at across an individual's life roles. So this could be the load that somebody's carrying at home. If we're looking at, you know, children having that sandwich generation a lot of us are working in right now, where we not only have children that we're trying to you know, raise and set off into what is now a really crazy world, but also we might be looking after you know, the elders in our lives. It's also really important to consider capacity from our own sense of well-being. I've seen lots of stuff, I'm sure lots of you have, on various social medias about the COVID weight that people are, you know, we're staying at home and perhaps eating and maybe even drinking a little bit too much. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where people are taking this opportunity to, you know, hit the gym in different ways or get exercise like they've never really gotten before. They've had to think about how they're going to do these things differently. Self-care is also a really important part of well-being. It's really, are we mentally and physically well and able to, and which gives us the capacity to respond to the things that we're facing. And then finally, the last factor in the capacity component is this overall notion of fit. How well do I fit with the roles that I'm being? If I'm thinking about fit from a work perspective, do I really fit well with my team? Do we have values alignment is really important for within the career engagement model. Roberta and I know didn't, you know, from a career perspective, we've always talked about, you know, hire for skill and fire for fit. So that notion of, do I fit within this community, whether it's a work community, a volunteer community, whatever it might be. So that's a really important thing as well. Now, when you go back to that notion of challenge and capacity and this dynamic interaction of these two, and where there's some sort of balance, then you're in the zone of engagement. It's really important when we're thinking about the capacity that we have to rise to the challenges that we're facing, that we think about all of these sorts of things. So am I lacking capacity because my organization is not able to provide me with something? Am I lacking capacity because I don't have the personal supports? Am I lacking capacity because I'm not taking very good care of myself? So there's lots of things packed into that notion of capacity that we want to really pay attention to.
Deirdre, can I jump in just for a sec? Because
absolutely.
One of the influences that we had early on was Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. Yep. And we talked about, Csikszentmihalyi always talked about balancing challenge and skills. And so just as Deirdre was talking about the capacity piece, that was what sort of made us move away from us talking about flow, is that we were always saying, well, it had to be more than that. You can't just blame the individual or say that somebody just needs to be upskilled to get them into flow, but other stuff happens. So as Deirdre mentioned, highly skilled in terms of knowing this model, developing this model research. But if our internet went down right now in the middle of a webinar, that would be really challenging and would be overwhelming to us. And so the beauty, I think, of this model is the breadth of what we look at in terms of capacity, whether it's looking even just within the workplace, like the organization has a responsibility to help with resources right now, even though people are working from home. A lot of people are working from home with inadequate internet or from their laptop or from their phone, and they need the proper resources. So organizations have a role there, but also we look to other supports within our life. So family roles have had to be distributed to, you know, help keep this sort of home-based life functioning while people are, you know, working and going to school and doing all sorts of other things together. So I just wanted to mention that our model, people might see some similarities. Our model was influenced by Csikszentmihalyi. It was also influenced by Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. But the breadth of capacity is really important because that gives us so many intervention points as career practitioners.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Roberta. So we're going to go back to Menti, I think probably one final time. Hopefully I've done it right. So again, menti.com, it's the same code. If you've been following along, you should have to re-enter it. So in considering your current state of challenge and capacity, where do you most often find yourself? So you've got engaged, and then we move from slightly overwhelmed, and then disengaged to being overwhelmed, or we might go in the other direction, slightly underutilized, or disengaged through being underutilized. That's not a surprise.
Oh, we finally have someone on the slightly underutilized.
There you go. Good.
Oh, quite over. I love this real-time movement of the.
This is just brilliant. Yeah.
We've got 129 responses already. We know several hundred people on the call.
Yeah, this is great. And it's interesting that when, you know, with some of the research that we've done, Roberta, we did there was some research done in Australia replicating my doctor work. We did my doctor work. We saw, you know, almost similar patterns where, you know, it could have been easy to assume that, well, everybody's going to be feeling, you know, overwhelmed. But it's actually never the case. We always find people that are doing the same work or similar work, even people within the same agencies that are working, or within this, if we did this within a family, and the experiences, it can often be so incredibly different. And again, it takes us back to that, you know, we're all experiencing the same storm, but we're in vastly different boats. Yeah.
What's interesting here, given the audience that we have, is how few are identifying as primarily engaged right now. Because usually that's been higher, like it's been more of a bell curve. And this is more of a bimodal distribution where people are either on the underutilized side or the overwhelmed side, definitely more leaning toward overwhelmed right now. But interesting that a significant number of people have endorsed each of those categories.
Yeah, and we could overlay this, of course, by saying now, and I would encourage everybody to just reflect, did you answer this from the perspective of perhaps your work as a career development practitioner, as an HR manager, as a leader of an organization, whatever your work role is? Or are you really looking at this from more of a personal role, perhaps as a parent working from home with, you know, either kids being homeschooled, or perhaps the challenge of that a lot of parents are going through with whether or not they send their kids back to school and what that means. So when you start to overlay the notion of role, you can really see how this can get, you can have a different state of feeling with regards to career engagement, depending on what hat you're wearing at the time. So let's move along. Thanks so much for doing those, everyone. It's really fascinating to see. We appreciate that. So when we think about challenge in the COVID era, you know, we think about, you know, all of the challenges that we're experiencing, this whole notion of social.
Doji, if I may, actually, we got a question, and it's just related to what you said. A participant said, like, I feel overwhelmed with home, but underutilized at workspace. Do you want to comment that on how we can use the model in that situation?
I can jump in.
Okay.
So someone who's feeling overwhelmed at home but underutilized at work, in a situation like that, if I was the career practitioner working with someone or the counselor working with someone, I'd want to unpack that and be looking at it as two separate situations. So we decide which is the bigger priority right now. Is it dealing with the being overwhelmed at home, or is it dealing with the being underutilized at work? My hunch is it might be important to deal with the overwhelm first, because that might make space to do something about being underutilized at work. So then if we were looking at being overwhelmed at home, I'd want to be looking at all of the challenges that are occurring right now, and also all of the capacity that's available or perhaps not available that's been removed. So I have a daughter, for example, who's a single mom, was distancing from me because I'm older, and is working in a profession and had her son sent home from school. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that you might have to deal with there. But I would be looking at what additional supports could be put in place. I'd want to be looking at building capacity, but also maybe concurrently reducing challenge. So is there anything going on at home? And I'm not saying this flippantly, sometimes the answer is no, but is there anything going on at home right now that could be set aside, that could be postponed, that could be delegated, that could be simplified in some way? And if not, then we're going to be looking at capacity. You know, how can we build the resources that are needed to make the home function more effectively? So in my case, I'm in a new to me home, and you know, because we're spending so much time here, I've been Bed Bath & Beyond's best customer, just trying to get things in place that will make the home function in a way that works for me. So I would be looking at a variety of capacity building things. Then I'd look at the work situation, the underutilized at work, and say, is there anything? So you can fix being underutilized in two directions. You can increase the challenge to make it more interesting, or you can actually reduce capacity. So I might be saying, well, I'm feeling underutilized, maybe because there's too many people contributing to a project. Could I take on one project on my own? And would that make it more interesting or more challenging? Could I turn it into a game? Csikszentmihalyi talks about gamification. And could I set some interesting or intriguing deadlines or different ways of getting something done? So there's ways of reducing capacity, but what's more common is taking on challenge. And so some people are underutilized at work, are taking the opportunity now to engage in some learning. Lots of free webinars that CERIC and other organizations have made available, different online courses that people are taking. And so they're embarking on work-related tasks that they wouldn't normally have had time for. Not sure if that answers the question. And you know, without understanding the individual differences, it's really easy to come across as being flippant. And as a career practitioner, it would be really important that you check in with your individuals to fully understand what's going on for them. Otherwise, it sounds, you know, that you just are ignoring, you know, the huge challenges and the huge capacity issues that people are facing every day.
Roberta, I would add to that, if I may, that, you know, and again, each individual person is going to be different, but, you know, there's also the notion of being very careful, because as you start to play with some of these things, you know, it could be that while home is completely overwhelming and that there's lots of challenges there, we have to, I would also be exploring with a client whether maybe feeling underutilized at work is okay for now. Because if we make work, if we increase that challenge, obviously we want to be engaged at work. There's absolutely, you know, we've been talking about this for probably as long as I've been in career, that every person has a right to be in workplaces where they really feel, you know, connected and engaged, and they're happy to be there, they're contributing. But sometimes it's giving ourselves permission to say, I'm going to actually be okay with that right now, and really focus on getting, you know, some of these other things feeling a little bit more under control, or a little less challenging. So sometimes we have to look at it concurrently, but also sometimes we have to say, I'm going to give myself permission to live in this little bit of discomfort for now, until I get some of the other stuff sorted out. It's a very personal experience.
Yeah, and even strategically, I remember when I was doing my doctoral work and dealing with, you know, illness in the family and that kind of thing, I deliberately took on work that was boring. You know, it was professional work. It paid well, but it wasn't interesting work, and that left my mental capacity available to be engaging in grad school. So really good.
Absolutely. So thank you for the question. Great question. Keep them coming. So in terms of this notion of challenge in the COVID era, these are things that, you know, have surfaced and, you know, is really not going to be anything new. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. But, you know, some of this stuff, you know, is just, it's ongoing. And so what I added was, as Roberta and I were really working on this presentation, was something that I was introduced to just last Friday. And this is this notion of the loss of anticipated experiences, that we're, you know, are we giving ourselves permission to feel a sense of loss for the things that we maybe even didn't realize were going to happen, the experiences that we were perhaps going to have. And, you know, that there's a little bit of grief wrapped up in there. So that takes me to anybody that knows me, that has seen some of my presentations. This is one of my absolutely favorite quotes. And so I figure out a way to get it into almost anything. But I think this is a real testament to what we're almost living in globally. So it's not so much that we're afraid of change or so in love with the old ways, but it's that place in between that we fear. It's like being between trapezes. It's Linus, if hopefully everybody knows that reference, when his blanket is in the dryer. There's nothing to hold on to. And it seems to me that we're in this a little bit right now. So we're in that neutral zone of Bridges' model, that there's nothing for us to hold on to. We're not clear of the pandemic. We're not sure when, you know, people talk about this new normal, but how do we get to new normal if we're still having waves? Some countries have talked about being, and even in Canada, we've heard some reference to the second wave or the third wave. But then I heard on the radio the other day that technically, to have something be a second wave, the virus has to be completely gone from the community, and then it has to come back. So could this really be called a second wave? So none of us are really sure. And it's that right now we have nothing to hold on to in so many cases when it comes to COVID, that it can feel very much like we're all collectively Linus and our blanket is in the dryer. So when we think about capacity in the COVID era, again, these are going to be very individual experiences. We're not going to have enough room on a slide to cover everything, but some of the things that we're certainly hearing is this struggling with isolation. Mental health is becoming a real concern. Well, I shouldn't even say becoming more of a concern. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of focus, really needed focus on mental health within our communities over the last several years, that we're really doing a lot of work around reducing stigma, making mental health something that we talk about, that we're willing to talk about. And we're seeing a lot of, even more of that now, because all of this is having an impact on our mental health. Obviously, our physical health, our overall wellness, balancing childcare and elder care responsibilities. I have said to several of my friends of late, my son is in his 20s, so you know, he's less of a concern. I don't have to make decisions about whether I send my kids back to their elementary school or not, and if I don't send them, what that means. I can't imagine having to do that right now. I, on the other hand, have elder care responsibilities. So there's lots of stuff going on that is impacting our capacity, engaging with our social network. Zoom movie nights are just not doing it for me anymore. And then this whole notion of how do we transition to, you know, virtual work learning environments, the need to build new skills, arranging required supplies. Do we have the correct internet access? Do we have comfortable chairs because we're sitting, you know, all the time? So there's this definite challenges or capacity issues related to COVID that would probably not have been so highlighted, or maybe not even really an issue prior to the pandemic starting. So again, when we look at this kind of big picture, it's important to really remember that our capacity to rise to the challenges life can often present is really directly related to our ability to access those individual and organizational support. So, you know, when we're really looking from a career engagement perspective at the challenges that we're facing, in some cases, the exciting things, I've had incredible opportunities in my work, challenging opportunities, but also incredible opportunities COVID has presented around our ability to innovate and our need to innovate to make sure that we're engaging with students and giving students the things that they need to be successful. But my ability to do all of those things and really rise to the challenge that a new form of learning has created for our students is directly related to whether or not I have the individual ability to rise to that challenge, and also whether or not I have the organizational support. So it really is, you know, continue to think about this dynamic interaction between the two components of the model is so critically important.
Okay, I'm going to just very quickly go through some tips. So Deirdre just flipped through them really quickly because we really are at the time where we should be turning over to questions. So when we think about tips and strategies, the first one is to really monitor your own career engagement or the career engagement of the person you're serving. It's a bit like driving down the freeway where even if you've got cruise control, you're going to have to adjust the steering wheel a wee little bit. There's variable braking in cars that sort of don't make them go the same speed all the time depending on what's there. And that's true with career engagement as well. We need to monitor when we're feeling just slightly overwhelmed or slightly underutilized. So much easier to get back to engagement from that yellow zone in the traffic light colors, the warning model. So much easier to get back from there than when we're fully disengaged and trying to get rebooted. We need to reflect on what's working and what isn't. And so we can look at all of our different life roles. We can look at different aspects within our work so that we can unpack what's going well, don't fix what ain't broke, and also what's challenging. And so this allows us to take a bit of a strengths-based approach to our work. We also want to remind you to consider all of your life roles. And so as we've talked about quite a bit here, we recognize that career engagement is going to be impacted by what's going on at home. It's going to be impacted by other elder care responsibilities, but community responsibilities. Many of you are probably involved in coaching sports teams and trying to figure out how to, safely get kids back into those kinds of activities. So thinking about all of our roles within the community, our family and work, and how they interplay together. We also go back to many of the more traditional career models in that it's important to take that time to reflect, as in the HOPE action period, self-reflection and self-clarity are important. To know our skills, our interests, our values, our personal style, our dreams, our wishes, our ideal futures, all of those are important foundations if we're going to be working toward a zone of engagement. Then we want to start looking outward after someone has spent some time getting to know themselves, recognizing the opportunities that might be out there. And when we saw that first word cloud about how you're feeling right now, about your own engagement, somebody said opportunistic, that there are lots of opportunities out there right now. And we can certainly take advantage of them. So how can we help our clients understand where the opportunities are and how they can pivot in order to embrace those opportunities?
Okay, so the next tip is to decide how much or little to shift. Now may be the time where somebody's going to make a really big shift, perhaps to explore an opportunity. In other cases, it might just need to be a little tiny shift that somebody will be ready for, or somebody will need to make. And keep in mind that what Roberta just mentioned is that we really want to try to catch people when they're moving out of the zone of engagement into that I think there's a little problem, as opposed to, oh my goodness, I'm in a lot of trouble. And so it's really paying attention to that need for big shifts versus little shifts, or how much you want to do those things. We've talked a lot about this, so I'm not really going to go into it, but it's really important that we're looking at both the individual capacity as well as what the organization has the capacity to do to make change and those sorts of things. Both of these things work really closely together. We always want people to take on an appropriate level of challenge, and now may not be the time to take on too much. If we don't have the capacity to take on that new project, to do these two things. I'm in the middle of this right now. I agreed to do something, and it actually shouldn't be all that hard, but man, am I ever struggling to find the capacity to do that one little extra thing that I said what we do. I got caught up in the, oh my gosh, that sounds so exciting. And so we have to be careful of those things. As always, it's going to be so important to help our clients or ourselves to set short and long-term goals when we're looking at strategic career engagement or managing our career engagement in a real strategic way. We're going to have some short-term things that we're going to try and address, but also probably look at the longer term. And of course, we always want to set smart goals. And our last tip, I think, kind of really summarizes it. Obviously, avoid disengagement. And really how we're doing this is catching all of these things early. If we're attending to some of the tips that we've shared already, then we're really kind of working in that green zone and in that kind of yellow zone before we get to active disengagement. We want to try to really have small interventions early, really manage that interaction between challenge and capacity so that we can avoid disengagement altogether. Roberta, did you have your last words?
Sure. We've got another tip sheet that we'll share with you that talks about career engagement really within the COVID context. So the importance of fueling optimism, and we saw optimism come up in feelings, but not one of the biggest ones. So not experienced by everyone right now. We want to help people actively reframe the situations that they're in so that they can see some pieces of it that are within their control to manage, and some acceptance for the pieces that aren't. We really have seen people come together as communities and need to continue to embrace that, where everyone is contributing what they can, because that also will contribute to engagement when we feel like what we're doing is meaningful or it matters. It's making a difference to other people. This is a real time for innovation. The importance of effective communication can't be overestimated. It's time for people to be taking care of those around them, but also expanding that notion of who your own are to the community around you. We've been told to be kind, and we've seen the benefits of being kind, and we just really are encouraging the folks that we're working with to make the best choices they can with the information they have available right now, perhaps tentatively moving forward, and then being patient with ourselves and with others, accepting that perfect isn't possible. What we'd like to do now is turn it over for questions for the last few minutes. And we're also happy to have you reach out to us individually for the conversation to continue if we don't get to your question today.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Deirdre, for your presentation. Yeah, it's time for a question. I have to say that we got a lot of great comments on your model, including someone who commented how well it can be used with employee-employer conversation to explore a new option in a less stressful format. So I love these comments. So we got several questions on the model itself. Let's maybe take a couple of them. Taylor is asking, how does the model address being overwhelmed by volume, not by challenge of work? And can we be overwhelmed and underutilized at the same time at work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the volume to me is a capacity issue. And so it's, I would be looking at not trying to have the individual solve the problem, but recognizing if there's too much volume of work, then we need to do something either to stem the flow of work, get additional people on the team. And I recognize as a business owner how hard that is. When it's the busiest is exactly when we need somebody who's already up to speed. And it's not the time that we can train somebody and get them up to speed. So Deirdre and I have spent many, many long hours over the years working on projects where we knew full well if we had someone else there that already knew how to do the job, they'd be useful. But now wasn't the time for us to engage in a hiring process. So I definitely understand that. The only thing I can say, if you can't quickly build capacity and you've got a lot of volume, is turning to prioritizing. And also recognizing that perfect isn't possible and just renegotiating some deadlines. So, you know, I'm someone that doesn't like to do that. I like to be able to follow through on commitments I've made. But I've had a great deal of success in reaching out to people saying, you know, here's what's happening. I thought that I would be able to get something to you by Thursday. I'm not going to be able to do it until Monday. Will that work for you? And if they say, no, it absolutely won't, we need it Friday, then I go back and try some other reprioritizing thing. So that's
Roberta, if I can just jump in, because CERIC mentioned that somebody talked about this being a great model to use in the workplace. And I think this is where an example of where career engagement can be really powerful for team leaders and managers, because they can start to understand how their role in building, the organization's role in building that capacity, or trying to help people prioritize, or in my case right now, what I'm doing at work is building rationales for that staff expansion, knowing full well that that's going to be challenging to start because we're going to have somebody to train, but it's going to solve the problem longer term. So it becomes a very powerful tool for managers as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And actually jumping on that, Deirdre, we got a comment question speaking on how employer can potentially adapt their work. And Sharon was asking if you guys are aware if employer has adapted or changed their view of staff engagement during COVID, if they accept that the staff are a little bit less engaged in work tasks or giving them more time. Do you have any information on that?
I've absolutely seen some examples of that. So I've seen some employers in industries that aren't helping professions, that are engineering type industries, make real accommodation for families that have home responsibilities for their children. One of the things that we didn't mention right now that's happening is, even if children are back in school, if there's been any contact in their close contacts in school, then that child is sent home for a 2-week quarantine. So I have a grandchild going through that right now. And so even when parents think that they've got the solution and have their kids in school, we know how tentative that is, or how easily that could change. And so employers who have been understanding and really let their employees know that they're valued, that they're needed, that they will do what it takes in order to keep them employed with the organization, are the ones that are going to come out as winners here. But employers who are being really harsh and not flexible at all are the ones that are just, their employees are going to hit the breaking point and will either be off on medical stress leave, or they'll quit their jobs and ride this out in some other way, or they'll find another employer. So it's super important right now for employers. I'm incredibly conscious of this as an employer myself right now, that I do not want to lose my team. And so I'm going to do anything it takes in order to make their work life tolerable. Hopefully more than tolerable, engaging. But as an employer, the bottom line is I want to make any adjustments that we need to make in order to keep that person for the long term.
Yeah, that's really good. Good to hear that from employer. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but we got a lot of great questions, and I'm sure we will all love continue the conversation. But let's wrap up. Roberta and Deirdre, thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very interesting to learn more on how life and work's role can affect actually the career and development of people and career engagement. Thank you for having shared your knowledge and expertise with us today.
Thanks. Cyril, maybe you could send us the questions if you can capture them, and maybe we could respond in a blog post or something.
Of course, yeah, I will be more than happy to do that. So I will make sure to do that. And again, if you guys have more questions, I'm sure Deirdre and Roberta will be happy to be contacted as well.
Absolutely. Please don't hesitate. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so now just before leaving, let me share a few information for you all. If you wish, you can learn more about the Career Theories and Model at Work book, including how you can get your own copy at ceric.ca/theories. And as I mentioned earlier, you can expect to receive a follow-up email from us in the next few days with the recording of today's webinar. So thank you in advance for your patience. In the meantime, you may want to join us to our other webinar series scheduled this fall at CERIC, including a French webinar series on online career development practice starting tomorrow with Michel Turcotte, Nadia Villeneuve, and Annie Gourde. Another series on career engagement for mature worker, co-presented by Roberta Borgen, Bill Borgen, and Jennifer Luke from Australia. And finally, a webinar series with Tanis Goddard on remote career services. So please visit our website at ceric.ca/webinars for more information or to register. But for now, please take a few minutes to share your feedback and future learning need with us in the survey that will pop up on your screen. And let me close by thanking you once again, Roberta and Doji, for your presentation today. And thank you all the participants for your great engagement throughout the series. Have all a great day, and we hope to see you at another learning opportunity very soon.